state system in international relations. Aims of the study. Explain the rise of the state and the concept associated with sovereignty. Discuss state progress in the 20th century. Assess some of the state-centric criticisms. Explain how the sovereign state evolved after 1648. Differentiate between forms of legal, interdependent, domestic sovereignty. Describe some of the challenges and opportunities that states face in a globalizing age. Introduction. This topic focused on the evolution of international society and a number of contemporary concepts and theories. This topic provides you with a number of important methods to examine the problems faced by today's international society. It first looks at how, and why, state-centric international society has emerged. It will then explore why the state, especially in the 20th century, was such an effective international actor. Concept of state in international relations. States have been around for centuries and are now such a familiar part of IR's discipline. We often take this as for granted that they have always been, and will always be, aspects of international society. This is a baseless historical proposition. Although states are an extremely well-established type of political community, they have not always existed in forms we would recognize today. In addition, there's no reason to think that state will necessarily remain key actor to IR in the future. Sovereign states were at best marginal players in international society until a few hundred years ago. Before the mid-17th century, when the word «sovereign» was used, this meant a ruler, be it a monarch, or a prince. The structure was called feudalism. In a feudal society, loyalty to a person was divided among several rulers. A number of important changes in and around the 16th century have turned medieval Europe's hierarchical international society into one that can be recognized today, replacing competing communities with the territorial state's exclusive sovereignty. The first change coincided with the rise of royal power over minor lords' local power. Legally, principles such as what pleases the prince have the force of law and what the king wills, the law wills justified the authority of kings and queens. Money had made the transition to modern statehood possible. Early modern Europe was an area of almost endless warfare and wars were expensive. Thanks to their centralized bureaucracies and decision-making processes, royal states have proven unique in their ability to collect the revenue and credit required to fight. Concept of sovereignty and state system. Sovereignty. The fundamental concept of statehood is sovereignty. The question of who came first is immaterial insofar as one is inseparable from the other. Without sovereignty, it is as difficult to imagine the modern state. Even defining sovereignty is a difficult task. It is both an aspiration and an institution. As the English school suggests, it's both a rule of membership and a rule of behavior in international society. Sovereignty itself is composed of two main features. 1. The idea that no foreign power should be enforced on the state. 2. The idea that the state is the supreme authority within its territory. The rise of sovereignty in international society as a guiding principle did not go unchallenged. Problems with sovereign states. We have looked at the sovereign state's growth as an actor in international society so far. We'll look at some of the problems scholars identified with the statism and the state itself. Looking at states and states alone, one only gets a partial view of contemporary IR. Another clear drawback to the statism is that many of the non-state actors are far more powerful than the states they operate in. For example, take some of the giant oil companies or massive agri-businesses which dominate world trade. When dealing with poorer states' economic resources, one easily assumes that the transnational corporation (TNC) will definitely win in a battle of influence. TNCs do not have the same legal authority as small states, but they have more impact on global affairs. Another critical point against the state focuses on what they are not able to do. Some scholars does not think that our current international order is really up to the challenge of handling international crises based on a system of sovereign states. They claims that an intersection and mixture of humanitarian, economic and environmental crises challenges the post-1945 international order. They argues that self-interested states do not have the resources, the desire or the imagination to deal with these transnational problems. The world we live in is profoundly interconnected, but the tools that states have at their disposal are locked into the sovereign state structure of Westphalia. In the 20 Years' Crisis, Carr notes that isolated nation-states could not solve either the problems facing the world economy or those confronting Europe. Carr suggests that the concept of sovereignty was invented after the breakup of the medieval system and was in a transition phase. He argues that Europe will have to shift in time towards a new order composed of broad, functionally efficient units within a new European federation where sovereignty is pooled or shared. While this was unlikely to lead to the state's total disappearance, some kind of shift to the traditional international structure was clearly on its way. It was in making what Carr called a new international order. This critical view of the state remains at the center of discussions between IR policy makers and academics after the war. After its 30 Years' crisis between the end of the First and Second World Wars, it provided the basis for rethinking Europe. This period was marked by the state's profound failure to bring prosperity and order to its citizens. The states still constituted the cornerstone of an emerging European community in the new Europe formed after 1945. Indeed, the main drivers behind the European project were two states in particular, France and Germany. Some loss of sovereignty by European member states was inevitable in order to achieve its long-term goals of peace and economic development. In return for the benefits coming from closer European association, some states were prepared to give up some of their constitutional independence. Others have proved far less happy to trade their international sovereignty away. Nonetheless, every European state took part in this process, negotiating one dimension of its sovereignty with a commitment to strengthening another. The debate regarding sovereignty is not limited to Europe post-Second World War. It has continued to rage in many parts of the world since the end of the Cold War and the disintegration of states. As Nicholas Wheeler argues, the world faced a stark choice in the 1990s. Either it could follow the conventional rules of an order that prevented any involvement in the domestic affairs of sovereign states, or it could try to create a new set of rules that would permit intervention in the interests of humanity. Where would that interventionism all end? Who decides to intervene and why? Are we going to end up undermining the concept of sovereignty which has served the international system reasonably well, and to which no obvious alternative exists? Such a question poses problematic concerns for the sovereign states of the world. International law and the role of sovereign states. Global treaties and legal systems have been in effect for decades. National laws today stand alongside a growing body of international law. International law limits the spectrum of permissible actions available to states. It is important to understand the unique capacity of a state to enact laws governing its citizens' behavior. The 20th century saw the rise of completely universal legal codes and institutions, such as those affiliated with the United Nations. Legal agreements reached in these intergovernmental organizations enforced on states and individuals by supranational court systems, like the International Criminal Court (ICC) and the International Court of Justice (ICJ). International law isn't a non-state actor by itself. Rather, it is an international society institution that is supported and applied by a powerful group of international organizations. If it is acknowledged, it clearly influences how states operate. International laws also help in governing minority and human rights. Important conventions such as the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide play a significant role in determining what states in international society can and cannot be permitted to do. This does not mean the law will always be obeyed by all states. States can break it, particularly when they feel that the benefits of doing so outweigh potential international community sanctions. Legal statehood conditions are set out in the 1933 Montevideo Convention: a permanent population, a defined territory, government, and the ability to enter into relations with other states. However, in most situations, the presence of international laws and conventions ensures that states can no longer do to their own citizens whatever they want. This shapes their behavior in ways that were unheard of before the 20th century. State system and international society. Analyzing international relations allows one to think carefully about who and what constitutes an actor in international society. IR scholars have been talking about this matter a lot. In this approach, some have been seriously statist, prioritizing the state as the planet's primary form of the political community. The statist approach is opposed by others. They argue that since 1989 globalization has fundamentally altered the global security environment, pushing us to think more about the world more in terms of non-state actors. Until the 17th century, states were just one of many political organizations in a world containing competing collections of empires, feudal fiefs and tribal chiefdoms. The centralization of political power in the hands of a single ruler marks the beginning of the modern state, which is described within its territorial jurisdiction by its exclusive right to the supreme authority. Centralized states have been particularly good at raising the resources and manpower required to fight wars, allowing them to compete against many other forms of political units. Security and the state. The traditional approach to security focuses on the state's security and ability to resist destruction or subjugation, usually by at the hands of another state. Some scholars challenge the statist approach of IR to security, pointing out that states themselves are often the greatest threat to their people's well-being. The quantitative approach to IR has been criticized by analysts on the grounds that it leads to a fundamental misunderstanding of security in the modern world. This has put a lot of focus on the military capability of a state, its economic base, and the strength of the bureaucratic structures. According to a new generation of authors, the line of analysis is misconceived. They argue that the real focus of security should not be the states but rather the individual human beings. Looking at it in such terms, the state is a cause of global disorder as much as it is a source of international peace and stability. First, there are many cases in which states are sources of insecurity themselves. This means that the most likely source of violence, arbitrary detention, and material deprivation arises not from any international threat or external actor, but from the state itself. Where this is the case, increasing a state's strength will only serve to increase its ability to oppress, rendering many of its citizens less secure. Enhancing state power doesn't always lead to improved security conditions for ordinary citizens. A second reason not to make the state the primary focus of security is that the well-being of narrow elites occupying positions of power may be prioritized. The most likely sources of danger to ordinary human beings stem from poverty, ill health, lack of education, and underdevelopment. Emphasis on meeting the needs of individuals may be a more effective route to security than boosting the size and number of cannons. Conclusion. Despite many challenges faced by states, the state survives as an international society's core institution and seems likely to remain in the near future. States face a number of threats to their sovereign authority and autonomy. Nevertheless, states remain the only actors capable of assembling the resources, legitimacy and organization required to defend people from foreign invasion and also provide the types of public goods a modern population demands. Recalling main points. Until the 17th century, states were just one of many political organizations in a world containing competing collections of empires, feudal fiefs and tribal chiefdoms. The centralization of political power in the hands of a single ruler marks the beginning of the modern state, which is described within its territorial jurisdiction by its exclusive right to the supreme authority. Centralized states have been particularly good at raising the resources and manpower required to fight wars, allowing them to compete against many other forms of political units. Important vocabulary. States, country. Sovereignty, failed states. Public goods. Thanks for watching.